Do you know that everyone in the US has rights? I know, regardless of your immigration status. I have done a video recently where I talked about how people have the right to remain silent when questioned by ICE, and someone commented on that video telling me that I am wrong, that only legal residents, only documented immigrants have a right to those things in the US. Well, in this video, I want to teach you your rights. In case you don't know, in case you're in the US and you don't know your rights, so that you can prepare if you ever have an ICE encounter. I do want to do a disclaimer at the beginning though. Most immigrants, documented or undocumented, in the US will not have an encounter with ICE. However, it's important for you to know what your rights are in case if you fall into that small amount of people that do have ICE encounters, whether you're checking in with ICE or you get pulled over, you get arrested and you have to deal with ICE, or you overstayed your visa and ICE for some reason comes to your door. You need to know what to do. So in this video, we're going to be going through your rights and making sure that you are prepared in case you ever have an ICE encounter. I am U.S. immigration attorney Lilian Chukwurah, and I help my clients get green cards and citizenships for themselves and their families using the U.S. immigration law system. When it comes to your rights, there's two forms it can take, either defensive or offensive. So we're going to start with the defensive, which is when you actually have an ICE encounter. What do you do in that moment to protect yourself? Offensive is what can you do before you ever have an ICE encounter to prepare yourself in case it does happen. So defensive, you are in the middle of an ICE encounter. Offensive, you don't know if you will ever have an ICE encounter, but you want to prepare yourself just in case it happens. As I said before, everyone that is within the US has certain basic rights. It does not matter what your immigration status is. If you are within the US, you have constitutional rights, and we're going to be talking about what those rights are and how you can use it to protect yourself in case of an ICE encounter. If you have an encounter with local law enforcement, so your police departments, things like that, you need to talk to a criminal defense attorney to figure out what your rights are and all of that. Some of the things I'm going to talk about can be applied when dealing with local law enforcement, but in this video, we are strictly talking about ICE encounters, immigration enforcement, okay? Immigration enforcement, not local police. And these things apply not just to ICE, but CBP, which is the Customs and Border Patrol. So let's talk about it. Let's start with talking about how someone can come in contact with immigration enforcement, whether it's ICE or CBP. All right. The first one is if you have any contact with the criminal justice system. So if you've been arrested, you have a criminal case, that is a surefire way to come in contact with immigration enforcement. The second way that you can have contact with immigration enforcement is if you apply for a benefit with USCIS while you have a removal order from immigration court, or you have a criminal charge pending, or you have a criminal conviction. Green card holders returning from a travel outside of the US get to have a contact with immigration enforcement by going through CBP, because again, CBP is an immigration enforcement agency. If there's any raids or targeted enforcement, so raids can be something like a workplace raid where ICE targets a specific employer and goes to their facility and raids the place. That is one of the other ways that you can be in contact with immigration enforcement. And then finally, there are other limited circumstances, but The majority of them are either you have a criminal case, you're applying for something with USCIS while you have a removal order, or you have a criminal case, you are a green card holder returning to the US, CBP is there, and they are going to do the immigration enforcement, not really ICE. And then finally, if there's a targeted raid or enforcement where you are. So next, let's talk about reasons a person can be deported from the US. They lack lawful status, they have criminal grounds, so they have either, a drug conviction, theft, fraud, and domestic violence, violations of protection orders. So if you have a restraining order and you violate your restraining order, that can lead you to deportation proceedings. And sometimes things that you consider to be minor offenses can lead to you being mandatorily deported. So it's really important that you are basically consulting with an immigration lawyer every single stage. If you have a criminal charge, if you have anything going on in the criminal court, consult a lawyer, because that can lead to you being in deportation proceedings, okay? Now, when you are interacting with immigration enforcement in any of these situations, it's really important to know your rights, right? Like I said before, everyone in the US has certain basic rights under the Constitution, regardless of their immigration status. So it is important that you know your rights and you assert your rights. What does that mean? It's not only that you know that you have the right to remain silent, but when you are in that situation, you actually remain silent. That's what I mean by assert your right. So you know your right and you assert your right. If you just know your rights and you don't assert your rights, it's not really helpful to you, right? So it's really important that you know your rights and you assert your rights. All right. And part of asserting your rights is the right to remain silent. This can be the hardest for people, especially immigrants, because when you are in those situations, you want to explain yourself. You want to appeal to the other person, but that is not going to be helpful to you, okay? You may end up giving them more information than is necessary that can actually lead to you being put in detention or being deported through expedited removal. So you really want to exercise this right. In the description to this video, I am going to put the link again to the ILRC red cards that has your rights written on them. You can download it in different languages so that you can put it in your wallet so that you don't have to memorize these things. But if you do end up in an ICE encounter, you can pull out your card and look at it, okay? So just know, I'm going to go through your rights, but having the rights card in your wallet can help you, okay? Can help you so that you don't have to remember every single thing. Now, let's go through the different scenarios where you can assert your rights, right? We know you have the rights and then you assert your rights. If immigration comes to your home, do not, for the love of God, do not open your door immediately, right? Legally, you do not need to open your door unless the officer provides you with a warrant signed by a judge. All right. This is where in my other video, I said that and someone, commented how undocumented immigrants do not have this right. They are wrong. Okay. They are wrong. It's a constitutional right for anyone in the US. So if US immigration comes to your door, comes to your home, you do not have to open the door unless the officer has a warrant signed by a judge. You have to ask the officer to identify themselves and the agency that they're from. You can ask them to do that. And they do have to identify themselves. Federal agents have to identify themselves when they come to your home. You can ask if they have a warrant signed by a judge, right? Really important. And in that situation, just know, not only do you have the right to not open your door unless they have a warrant signed by a judge, you have the right to remain silent, you have the right to an attorney. So if you choose to invoke those rights, state to the officer, I request my right to silence and to an attorney. Remember, the government is not going to provide you an attorney. You have to do that for yourself. So part of the offensive part of the Know Your Rights is having an attorney that you can reach out to in those situations. Okay, so you can call a friend, a family member, or an attorney to just inform them of what's going on. I typically suggest having an attorney that you can reach out to, or making sure that your family and friends have attorneys that they can reach out to on your behalf. So if they come to your home, don't open the door immediately. Make sure they have that warrant signed by a judge, and then invoke your right to remain silent. When they do slide that warrant under your door, there are a couple things you need to look for. Look for your name, right? It needs to have your name, and it needs to have the judge's signature. It can't just be, a blanket warrant for whoever lives there. No, it needs to have a specific name on it. So when you're in your home, it's really important that you exercise your rights and you assert your rights. Now, if you are driving, we want to make sure that you are doing things that will reduce your interaction with law enforcement, that can then bring ICE into the mix, right? That's really important. We want to reduce the interactions that you have with law enforcement that brings ICE into the mix. So the first thing is, if you are driving by yourself, make sure that you have a full driver's license, not a permit. You are not allowed to drive with a driver's permit without someone else in the car that has been driving for a year, that's over the age of 21, that's sitting right next to you as you're driving. Okay, so if you're undocumented, really important that you follow these rules. Driver's license must be a full driver's license, or you have someone else in the car that meets all the requirements, all right, that's had their driver's license for a year, and they're sitting right next to you as you are driving with your permit. Do not mess this part up, because if you don't have a full license and you're driving by yourself, you get pulled over. Guess what happens? You don't have a license. You're operating a vehicle without a license. Depending on where you are, that can escalate quickly with ICE being involved. Now, if immigration or the police stop you in public, it's really, really important that the first thing you do is stay calm, okay? Stay calm. Do not run or resist arrest. Do not run or resist arrest, because trust me, that is the quickest way to end up with additional charges versus whatever they were going to charge you with, all right? Now, when that happens and you are stopped in public, you want to ask either the immigration officer or the police officer if you are free to leave, right? Are you under arrest, or are you free to leave? If they say you're free to leave, then tell them you are going to leave. If they say you're under arrest, then they're going to read you your Miranda rights and arrest you. Remember, you have the right to remain silent. I cannot stress this enough. Please, you have the right to remain silent. Use it. Okay? Tell them that you are going to remain silent and that you want to speak to an attorney. Remember, in most situations, if it's not a criminal case, you may not be assigned an attorney. In immigration cases, you are not going to be assigned an attorney. You will need to have your own attorney. Really, really important that I keep stressing that, because the right to an attorney, to speak to an attorney, is one that you have, but you can only exercise it if you do have an attorney to reach out to. So plan ahead. You have the right to not be fingerprinted unless you are being arrested. Okay? If you're not being arrested, you can refuse to be fingerprinted. If you are being arrested, they can fingerprint you. Really important, please. And then if you choose not to, if you resist that, that can be seen as resisting arrest, and you can end up in more trouble. So really keep that in mind. Remember that the police can search you if they have a reasonable suspicion that you are armed and dangerous, okay? If they have a reasonable suspicion that you are armed and dangerous, they can search your person. If you have a valid immigration document, so let's say you are not a US citizen. Remember, I am talking to non-citizens in this video. If you're a US citizen, this is not going to apply to you. This next point is not going to apply to you. You have constitutional rights, obviously, because you're a US citizen. But as far as these tips, I'm speaking specifically to undocumented immigrants and immigrants that are not US citizens. Really important. If you have valid immigration documents, so you're a green card holder, you have a visa, whatever it is, you have TPS, you want to make sure that you have documentation on you that proves your status. You are actually required by law to carry proof of your status if you are not a US citizen. Okay, if you're over the age of 18 and you're not a US citizen and you have lawful legal status in the US, you need to carry proof of that with you at all times. And then if you're in a situation where you're stopped and you have a lawyer, remember you have a right to call a lawyer. Okay, and then this is super important. Super important. Do not provide false documents or false information to the police or immigration enforcement. Please do not. In some states, like in Massachusetts, that's actually a crime in and of itself. So you don't want to do that. All right. You rather not provide anything than provide false documentation. Right? If they ask your name, do not provide a false name. Rather, invoke your right to remain silent. There are certain states where it is a requirement for you to give the officer your name. So when you're stopped by police and they ask your name, there are certain states where that is a requirement for you to state your name. But please, after that, right? If you are required by your state law to give the officer your name, fine, give the officer your name. But after that, invoke your right to remain silent. Like, it's really, really important that you do not give up rights, because once you start talking, right, it's really hard to reel it back. All right, because anything you say can and will be used against you. So how do you prepare for these interactions, right? How do you prepare for God forbid, the day that you have ICE interactions? First thing you need to know is you need to know your rights, right? That's why we have this video going on. You need to know your rights. And from knowing your rights, you need to make sure you are memorizing phone numbers, right? Your family members, your attorney, an organization that you trust. You might only be able to make one phone call while you're detained. So you need to make sure that the person you're calling has the information to help you. All right? Don't call some random person. Memorize important numbers that if you call them and tell them, hey, I've been picked up by ICE, I am currently at XYZ place, the person will be able to then take action, contacting your lawyer, making sure your family members know what's going on, taking action on your behalf. You need to have that. So make sure you're memorizing that phone number. Like I said, you may only be able to call one person. So make it the right person. And make it also someone that is a US citizen or has legal status in the US, okay? Because if they have to post bond for you, they have to have legal status in the US to post bond for you. So really, really important. Now, if you are arrested or detained, so next up, if you are arrested or detained, you need to make sure that you do not sign anything or take voluntary departure without speaking to a lawyer first. So what does this mean? Sometimes they give you documentation to sign. For example, if you are a permanent resident and you are detained by CBP, they may give you a form I-407, which basically is used, once you sign it, you are giving up your permanent residency. They don't explain that to you very well. But if you sign that form, you are no longer a permanent resident of the United States. So really important that you do not sign anything without talking to a lawyer first. You do not take voluntary departure without talking to a lawyer first. Voluntary departure means that you are choosing to leave the US on your own accord. You're going to pay for your flight. You're going to leave the US. You do not get to fight in court to try and stay in the US. You do not get to prove your case to a judge. Your right to removal proceedings away by signing that document. So it's really, really important that you talk to a lawyer first. Do not rely on immigration agents to provide you with information about your rights, okay? They can lie. So make sure, again, ask a lawyer for the facts. Do not rely on what immigration agents tell you. You are allowed to be visited in detention by a lawyer. And if you want to contact your country of origin's consulate, you are allowed to contact your consulate to just let them know what is happening. But those are the rights you have when you are in detention. Remain silent. Contact your lawyer or family member that can work out the process of getting you a lawyer. You are able to be visited by a lawyer in detention, and you are able to contact your consulate. If you are detained, right? If you are that person that is called by a family member and you're trying to figure out where they are, there's something called an online detainee locator. It's basically a way for ICE to let you know where this person is when you put in their information. Again, you're only able to do this if they already gave you the information. So if you are that family member that is the go-to person that the person that's being detained is going to call, make sure you have their documentation, copies of things, their A number, whatever you have to be able to find them on this online detainee locator. I'm going to put the link to that in the description, okay? So all these things that I'm talking about, the red cards, the online detainee locator is going to be in the description to this video. Hopefully you don't need it. Hopefully you never need it. But if you do need it, it's there for you. Okay? As I said in the beginning, there's defensive things you can do and then there's offensive things you can do. So let's talk about the offensive things you can do as a non-citizen. I say that because if you are a permanent resident and you get caught up with ICE and all of this will still apply to you. So it does not just apply to undocumented immigrants. It can apply to legal, lawful immigrants that end up either with a criminal charge or, something in their history that requires them to be in immigration court. So it's really important that as you are navigating the US, that you are aware that until you become a citizen, you need to make sure that you know your rights. Right. So the first thing that you want to do on the offensive side is to prepare your family, right? You need to have family preparedness plans, the same way you do disaster preparedness plans. So, if there's a hurricane coming and your zone, like your city is going to be hit hard, you start preparing, getting your flashlights, doing all of this. Well, in this situation, you want to make sure that you have your plan in place in case something happens. I'm going to do a future video where I actually break down what a family preparedness plan can look like. So, but today we are just going to talk about in broad strokes what you can do for that. So your offensive rights are things you can do even before any ICE contact happens, right? There are steps that you can take right now in order to be better prepared in case you end up in that situation where you have ICE contact. So first thing is, do carry any valid documents that show your legal status, okay? Have them with you. All right, it's required by law, like I said before, so make sure you have it with you. Don't carry any false documents, and definitely do not give any false documents to law enforcement or ICE enforcement. So let's talk about what you can do as far as your children are concerned, right? You have the right to make decisions for your children, but you want to make sure that you have a plan in place. In certain states, you may be able to basically prospectively sign a documentation that allows someone to be able to take temporary guardianship of your children and make temporary decisions for them while you're in detention. So you sign all the documents, they hold it, and then when the eventuality happens that you end up in ICE detention, they can now use that document to make sure that your children are taken care of and their needs needs are met without having to go to court and filing for guardianship. They can immediately spring into action because they have those documents ready to go. It's like a healthcare proxy thing, but for your children. All right, think about it that way. So if you want that, make sure you're talking to a family law attorney in your state and getting those documentation prepared ahead of time. So again, with the family preparedness plan, you want to make sure that you are including who will take care of your children in your absence, plans for meeting your child's educational, medical, and emotional needs in your absence, and plans for reunification. So what happens afterwards, right? Making sure that someone is there taking care of your children, and then once you're released, this is the process that will take place to reunify with your children. All right, making a plan. You need to update your school contacts. Make sure, that the school knows who can pick up and drop off your children, right? It's really important. So whoever that person you have picked to care for your children in case you are detained, they should be on your child's pickup list for school, so that they can spring into action immediately and start caring for your child. Make sure that your child already has a passport. If they were born in the US, get them a US passport. Please make sure they have legal documentation showing their US citizenship and their ability to travel. That's really important because if, let's say, you choose to do voluntary departure and have to take your child with you, you need to make sure that they have documentation ready to go in case they need to travel with you. All right. And then you want to write a travel letter. This is a letter that basically allows your child to travel outside of the US without you. All right. So again, really, really important that you get these things done ahead of time. I typically, right, there is informal options where you can just have someone, talk to them, make arrangements, make decisions together on what it would look like if you do get detained. However, I suggest having something more concrete. Right? Something more concrete like an affidavit, caregiver authorization affidavit. That's something that may be Massachusetts specific, but it just gives the caregiver authorization to make decisions for the child for up to 2 years. All right. There's also the temporary agent authorization, again, for 60 days once it takes effect, but can be renewed. So your state may have things like this. You just need to talk to a family law attorney to make sure that you are covering all your bases in case you end up in this situation. And then if you were not able to do any of that and you get detained, the person can also go to the court and get legal guardianship of your child so that they can make decisions for them in your absence. So I typically suggest having something written out ahead of time, having a plan ahead of time, and not relying on the court to do a guardianship, okay? Because you need the person to be able to pick up your child. You need the person to be able to take them to their doctor's appointment, make decisions for them, and they won't be able to do any of that without authorization, all right? Now, you also want to make sure that you have your important documents, copies of it, saved in a place where that person, whoever is your contact person, has access to. So passports, immigration documents, things with your A number on it, things with, your hearing dates, things like that. Everything, your birth certificate, your children's birth certificates, your spouse's birth certificate, marriage certificate, whatever you have, you want to make sure that you have it in a place where you are not only telling your spouse, your family members, like if you have a lawyer, they should have a copy of that as well. In case something does happen, they already have the documentation they need to basically get the process going in representing you. And then finally, you want to make sure that you are getting legal advice and representation from an actual lawyer. Okay, I always say this. I remember in my last live that I did, someone asked if a paralegal charging a certain amount was a good deal or not, and I had to be very frank with them and say that a paralegal is not authorized to represent people in immigration court with USCIS or any other immigration agency. However, a lawyer and an accredited representative, meaning they have went through the process with USCIS, with the US government, and they've been authorized and accredited as a representative. Okay, it's not like they woke up and they say, okay, now I'm accredited. No, they went through the process. They worked with a lawyer. They worked through an agency to make this happen. And the government has listings of accredited representatives. So if you are in a process and you are not sure if the person you're working with is an accredited representative or just a paralegal that's claiming to be accredited, there is a listing. The government, right? The government does have a listing of all accredited representatives. I'm going to put a link to that in the description, all right? To be on the safe side, work with a licensed attorney as you are going through your process, okay? A licensed attorney can represent you with immigration court, with USCIS, and when they fill out your forms, they're saying that they filled it out for you, right? They're filing a document saying that they represent you. So, really important. Notarials, notary publics are not lawyers in the US and cannot provide legal advice. Interpreters, tax preparers, you know, when you see those multi-services and then they have immigration services, they are not authorized to represent you or give you legal advice in the US. So, really important that part of your planning is having either an attorney or accredited representative. Again, listings will be in the description. I get it, not everyone can afford an attorney, but you want to make sure that whoever is helping you is accredited and can be held accountable if there is an issue with your case. If they mess up your case, you can actually hold them accountable as things move along, okay? So you want to make sure, right? So your offensive rights is you want to make sure that you carry your documentation showing your legal status. You don't want to carry any false documentation or present any false documentation to ICE or police officers. You do want to make a plan for your family, and you do want to get an immigration checkup from a lawyer or a US government accredited representative. Okay, you want to make sure you get a checkup. A checkup is basically trying to figure out, is there something that I need to worry about? Is there things that I could qualify for based on all my immigration history? Really important to have those conversations ahead of time, not while you're in detention. So that's why I put that on the offensive rights part of things. All right, now just to recap, assert your right to remain silent. We're not going to argue about this. Assert your right to remain silent. Never open your door to ICE unless they have a signed warrant from a judge with your name on it. And finally, never sign anything from ICE, from the police, from anyone, without speaking with an attorney first, because you need to make sure what you're signing before you end up losing the status that you do have or voluntarily choosing to be deported. Okay, so make sure that you are protecting yourself and your family, especially with the craziness that's going to be happening in the next few weeks with the Trump administration coming in and their plan for mass detention and mass deportation. Make sure that you are in a place where you are protecting yourself and your family. If you would like to get an immigration checkup, feel free to reach out to me and schedule a strategy session. During the session, we talk about your history, we talk about your goals, and figure out if there is something I can help you with and how I can help you. So go ahead and do that. You can go to my website, lilylegal.com, and click on contact us. And when you click on contact us, you can pick a date and time that works best for you for us to speak, or you can call my office at 508-443-1788.